As I tell you the story of the people of God, do not despair. You may be tempted to despair. You may have been tempted to despair when Adam and Eve, who had all of the sweetness of God at their fingertips, chose to try to become like God themselves. You may have been tempted to despair when Abraham and Sarah, who were promised an heir and a people, chose to force away themselves, even upon their slave, rather than trust in their God. Things will not get better today. As we talk about Israel forming as a people, as a nation, you will only find more reason to despair as you look at the leaders of the people of God. Even most of those in the story who are celebrated as heroes are ugly and dark people. There are very few characters that we can emulate, very few that we can look to for hope. All that said, I beg you, do not despair, because to despair is to lose hope. And we have great cause for hope. Even as the story of Israel gets darker and more broken, the promises of God get stronger and more clear. To Eve, he promised a descendant that would crush the head of the serpent who misled her. To Noah, he promised that he would never again wipe all the wicked away, that he would turn the bow upon himself before destroying the world. To Abraham, he promised a multitude of descendants and to put his own life on the line for that promise. Even in that moment, he promises that kings will come from Abraham. And now to the people of God, he promises a king. Over and over again, the chosen people of God have failed. And over again, God met them in the midst of their failure with a promise. So it was with Adam and Eve, who failed, and in the midst of their failure were met with a promise. So it was with Noah, in the midst of mankind's failure, God met them with a promise. So it was with Abraham and Sarah, in the midst of their failure, God met them with a promise. The faithful God met his unfaithful people in Egypt, in the land of their suffering, with an immediate rescue and with a promise. So hope and do not despair. Our story picks up after the Exodus, after the people of Israel, who are freed from Egypt, have been led to Mount Sinai, and they were given a law to govern them. And as they left Egypt, God promised them a rich land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And he resided with his people in a tabernacle. He would meet with Moses and guide him into this land. He lived in the midst of his people. And he was holy where they were not, so only few with great caution could enter his presence. God led his people to the border of this new land that he promised them, and he told Moses to pick 12 scouts to go before them into enemy-occupied territory and to come back with stories of the new land that they would inhabit. And so 12 spies went into enemy-occupied territory, and 12 spies returned with a single report. The land did indeed flow with milk and honey. It was a beautiful land. They brought back samples of the fruit that it bore. But indeed, they brought back news that it was filled with fierce fighters and bloodthirsty warriors, even giants against whom they were like grasshoppers. Two of the men, Joshua and Caleb, said to the people of God, "Let us go into this new land that God has promised us and claim it. For what the Lord our God has promised to us, we trust." We trust in his promise. 10 of the men said, "The people there are bigger than us, and there are more of them than there are of us. If we go in there, we're going to die." The people of God were afraid, and they rebelled. They talked about stoning Joshua and Caleb. They longed for Egypt. And they missed Egypt. And so God gave them their way, not back to Egypt, not to the land of promise either, in between. You know this feeling, this in between, freed from enslavement, but not in the land of the promise, in between. The people of God did enter Canaan, but not until after 40 years, after a generation that saw some of the greatest miracles of God, had doubted and feared and passed away. Only after they had all died did they enter the land of Canaan, led by a new leader, a warrior leader, Joshua. And once again, they sent spies into the land and found that it was still exactly as good as God had promised. So they enter. There was once again a splitting of the sea, this time the Jordan River, with the Ark of the Covenant of God leading the way. And they pause on the other side, remembering the story of their people, remembering the Passover, remembering the miracles of God. And they move forward into battle. First, there is one more encounter we should mention. Joshua meets a strange man outside of Jericho, the first city that they run into, with a sword drawn. And so Joshua demands of him, "Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of God, or are you on our side, or are you on the side of our enemies?" The man responded, "Neither. I am the commander of the Lord's army." I think we could take note of this. I think that this is a centerpiece of the whole story to this point. Everything that I've said so far, everything that Pastor Tim and Pastor Matt have said so far in telling the story of God, I think that this highlights a major theme in the story of God. It is not an us or them story. It is not the people of God on one side against the people of the world who will come out ahead. It's not our side or their side. We like our side or their side stories, but this is not that. This is God's plan. Where there is a battle, it is God's battle. Where there is a promise, it is God's promise. Where there's a plan, it's God's plan. Where there's a price to be paid, God pays it himself. This is the story of God. He is neither ally nor foe. To make him ally or foe would be to make him too small. He is king. Israel then battles, and we see a pattern form. We see Israel obedient to the plan of God, faithful to him, and they win decisively in miraculous ways. They betray God. They take things into their own hands, and they are beaten down and destroyed. Over and over again, we see this pattern. Ultimately, Israel prevails, and God's promise to Abraham is fulfilled. The Israelites take control of the promised land. But Joshua dies, and the job is only half done. At the end of his life, he divides the land up into the tribes of Israel as commanded by God, and he urges the people, begs the people to remember the promises of God. He urges the people and begs the people to remain true to the God who rescued them, the God who saves them. They do not. The text says, "After that generation died, another generation grew up who did not acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things he had done for Israel." The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, and they served the images of Baal. This is the story of the people of God. Over and over again, the people of Israel went their own way, worshiping the gods of the people in the land around them instead of the one true God, and God would allow them to go their own way. For centuries, the people would rebel, and God would raise up a judge, and that judge would rescue Israel. Under this judge, raised up by God, God would do miraculous things. Leaders like Deborah and Gideon and Samson, names that you know, names that you hear rattled around. This is Judges 2, verses 18 and 19. It summarizes the story pretty well, the pattern pretty well. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge over Israel, he was with that judge and rescued the people from their enemies throughout the judge's lifetime. For the Lord took pity on his people, who were burdened by oppression and suffering. But when the judge died, the people returned to their corrupt ways, behaving worse than those who lived before them. They went after other gods, serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Even during the time of the judges, the Israelites began to long for Egypt again. They longed for the days when they were mastered and ruled over. They longed for a king. Gideon, one of the most prominent of the judges and rescuers, was offered the job. He said, the people called to him and said, "You rule over us. You rule over us." And Gideon replied, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord will rule over you." Gideon was wrong. He would not rule over them, but his son did accept the job, at least for the people of Shechem. His son Abimelech would be king over that people. To get the job, he killed 70 of his brothers, but he got the job. His rule would last for 3 years. In the end, both he and the people that he led were destroyed. In the time of the judges, the time of the judges was just a dark time in the history of Israel. The judges were not all admirable or great men. I think Deborah seemed pretty great. Gideon had enough wives and slaves to put forth 70 sons. Jephthah, he sacrificed his own daughter, murdered her. Samson was petty, angry, repulsive. They all killed loads of people. These were not great and admirable men, but they did serve a great and admirable God who fulfilled his promises and answered the call of his people. This is not the story of the people of Israel. This is the story of God. Judges ends with these words. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. The last of Israel's judges was a prophet named Samuel, and he honored God and listened to him, and the people listened to him. As he grew older, he appointed his sons as judges, but his sons were not like him. They dishonored God, and the people saw it. They saw a pattern, and they wanted something new, and so they looked around at how all of the other nations did it, and they saw a difference. They all have kings. So they asked Samuel, "Give us a king. Make us like the other nations." They already had a king. They already had a king to rule over them, a heartbroken king over a rebellious people. But Samuel took this request to God, who told him, "Do everything they say to you, for they are rejecting me, not you. They don't want me to be their king any longer. Ever since I brought them from the land of Egypt, they have continually abandoned me to follow other gods, and now they're giving you the same treatment. So do as they ask, but solemnly warn them about the way that a king will reign over them." Once again, God gives the people of Israel what they ask for. They ask for a king, and so they're given kings, but with a warning. And so Samuel passed along God's warning to the people of Israel. "This is how a king will reign over you," Samuel said. And he tells them about the corruption of kings, about the way that a king uses his people for his own riches and for his own glory. And Samuel says, when this day comes, you will beg for relief from this king that you have demanded, but the Lord will not help you. But the people refused to listen to Samuel's warning. "Even so, we still want a king," they said. "We want to be like the other nations. Our king will judge us and will lead us into battle." And so they were warned. And so it came to be that Israel, under the shadow of Samuel's warning, were given kings. And the kings were, as it turns out, just men. Typically men who were either corrupt enough to gain power in the first place or corrupted by the power that they had. First, Saul, tall, rich, handsome, the image of a king. And God hand-selected him. God hand-selected Saul as the man who would rescue Israel from the Philistines. And Saul responded to the call in exactly the way that you would want a king to respond, in humility. He says, "I'm in the least house, in the least tribe of Israel. Why am I being chosen for this?" He might have been a good man if he had been left in his humble corner of the world. Saul ruled, and it started well. He led Israel into great battles, defeating enemy after enemy. He reigned for 42 years, and it started well. But, so we've seen this pattern, right? The people of Israel collectively have, over and over again, been rescued by God, lifted up out of their enslavement, and then rebelled against him and chosen to go their own way. If the people as a whole did this over and over again, why would we not suspect that an individual man would do the same? Saul did not trust in God. When he felt like he was losing control of the people, he took more power for himself instead of trusting God and obeying the command of God. And so, in that moment, as Saul grabs for more power, he loses the throne. It would take years for him to actually lose it, and things would get much worse for him and for Israel. But God chose his successor even in that moment. Saul would sin over and over again. He would attempt to kill his own son, who would be rescued by the people. He would ignore the commands of God. He would send men to their deaths, all while accumulating wealth for himself. His successor was a man named David, the youngest son of a shepherd family, who started his life out humbly but boldly believing in the promises of God. Much like Saul when we first meet him, we find ourselves endeared by David. We find ourselves liking David very much. He's appointed by Samuel, but there are many years between his appointment and when he actually becomes king. First, he makes a name for himself by facing down a giant with a sling and stones, when all of the army was too afraid to fight. And then he serves in Saul's courts. He leads Israel to many victories in battle, and he is much beloved by the people. And it becomes clear that David is God's chosen ruler, and that Saul has lost God's favor. And so Saul descends into madness. He hunts after David. David has a number of chances to kill Saul, but does not, refusing to lay his hand on the anointed of God. And David remains faithful for a time at least, although he spends many years fleeing Saul, many years running through the wilderness. Saul, meanwhile, does a lot of evil and ugly things. He takes his daughter, Micah, already married to David, and gives her to another man. He consults a medium to resurrect the spirit of Samuel. Saul, the first true king of Israel, a humble boy who responds to the call by saying, "Really, me?" is overtaken by his sin, overcome by the enemy, and ultimately takes his own life. David learns of Saul's death, and he mourns. At this point, David returns to Judah, while Saul's son, Ishbosheth, becomes king of Israel, the first to divide this great nation, this new nation. David and the Israelites from the tribe of Judah war against the rest of Israel on the field of battle. Civil war ensues. And ultimately, David, the chosen of God, conquers his own people. Meanwhile, where is the presence of God on all this time? Where is the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God, the tabernacle? It's been absent from the kingdom. The Philistines captured it, and until David is enthroned over all of Israel, the presence of God is in exile. David fearfully brings it back to Jerusalem. And David recognizes in that time an incongruity. The presence of God is in a tent while I'm in a palace. David decides he ought to build a temple for God, a permanent home in the capital of the promised land. And so God tells Nathan, a prophet, who will tell David one of the most important promises in our story yet. As Israel has rebelled, as their king that they begged for has destroyed the land and split the kingdom, God, who sees that David is a man with blood on his hands and will sin in his own ways, makes a promise to David, to the people of Israel. He says, "Furthermore, the Lord declares that he will make a house for you, a dynasty of kings. For when you die and are buried with your ancestors, I will raise up one of your descendants, your own offspring, and I will make his kingdom strong. He is the one who will build a house, a temple for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son." And so it is that we are promised a king that is not like Saul. And David is not that king. David is not like Saul, but David is also not the king that we're promised. We're promised a king who will build a temple for the Lord, whose throne is secured forever, to whom God will call son. This is a high point for David. Receiving this promise is a high point for David. As his reign ensues, the power will corrupt him too. He rapes, he murders, his children destroy each other, his children rape and murder after him, and he covers it up. He's chased off his throne by his own son. Once again, warring ensues within the people of God. He's precluded from building the temple that he conceived of because God forbid it, because he had too much blood on his hands. We're two kings of a united kingdom into Israel, and they're madmen and murderers, and there is much darkness. But do not despair, because God promises us something better. A king whom he will call son, who will build his temple and rule from a throne that will last forever. We're promised a king. David is succeeded by his son Solomon, who is renowned for many things. He sought wisdom when offered anything in the world. He also starts his reign well. And he does build the temple of God, but he is not the promised king. And this is not the promised temple. This temple that he builds will be destroyed. He's corrupted by the power of the kingdom. He abandons the worship of God, collects hundreds of wives and concubines, and is a burden to the people of Israel. But still we have hope because God has promised us a king. Friends, this is the story of God creating a people for himself. Over hundreds of years, they taste of the sweet promise of God, and then they go and they do what is good in their own sight. They rebel against their one true king. They even demand a king to be chosen from amongst their own midst. There are these first three kings that start out their reign so promising, so well, and abandon what is good, choosing themselves over the people of God. These are not models for you to build your life after, but they are not cause for despair either, because we are not promised a new David, though it is through David that we will receive our one true king. The kingdom of Israel, and over again, God met them in the midst of their failure with a promise. So it was with Adam and Eve, who failed, and in the midst of their failure were met with a promise. So it was with Noah. In the midst of mankind's failure, we were met with a promise. So it was with Abraham and Sarah. In the midst of their failure, God met them with a promise. So it is with the first kings of Israel, with Saul and David and Solomon. In the midst of their failure, God met them and all the people of Israel with a promise. And so it is with you. In the midst of your failure, God meets you with a promise.